The alien princess, Vela, stood alone in the grand hall of the palace, her heart heavy with a weight she couldn't bear. The people who once praised her, admired her beauty, and respected her royal bloodline had now turned their backs on her. She had always been told she was destined for greatness, yet now she was nothing more than a tool to be discarded. The room was filled with whispers of betrayal. Her father, the king, had decided that she was no longer worthy of his crown. "You are a disgrace," he had told her earlier. "You failed to live up to our expectations. You are not fit to lead our people." His words cut deeper than any weapon could. The king had spoken, and the decision had been made. Vela was no longer the heir to the throne. Her people, the ones she had dedicated her life to serving, stood by the king's decision. They were quick to turn against her, seeing her as weak and unworthy of her royal title. The princess who had once been adored was now treated like an outcast. Her eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She was no longer the little girl who had dreamed of ruling. No, she was something else now, someone who had been abandoned by her own blood and cast into the cold, unknown world. But what hurt the most was the silence from the one person she had trusted the most, the man she had loved. He had once spoken of dreams, of a future together, but now he avoided her gaze. It was clear. He, too, had turned away. Feeling the sting of rejection, Vela turned to leave the hall. As she walked toward the grand exit, her heart ached with every step. She had been abandoned by her people, her family, and the one man who had once promised to stand by her side. It was then that she saw him, a human man, standing near the door, watching her with eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time: compassion. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't repulsed by her alien features or the reputation her people had cast on her. Instead, he looked at her as though she were something valuable. "Princess," he said quietly, his voice steady, "I will not turn my back on you." In that moment, a flicker of hope sparked within her. Could this human truly see her for who she was, and not for the mistakes of her people? Could he be the one to offer her a chance at redemption? Vela wasn't sure, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt like someone cared. The silence in the room was thick, like the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Vela stared at the human before her, uncertain of his intentions. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't disgusted by her appearance or her alien heritage. In fact, there was something oddly comforting in the way he looked at her, as if he saw beyond the scars and flaws, to the person she truly was. The human's name was Marcus. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to hold endless curiosity. His clothes were simple compared to the royal attire she was accustomed to, but it didn't matter. He had an aura of confidence, a calmness that seemed to bring an unexpected sense of peace. Vela didn't know why he was there, or how he had found his way into the palace in the first place. The king had kept tight security, and no one from the outside was supposed to enter. But here he was, standing in front of her. She couldn't help but wonder if he was just another person who would make promises that would eventually fall apart. But then he spoke again, breaking through the thoughts swirling in her mind. "I know what they did to you," Marcus said softly, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "I know you've been cast aside by your own people, but I don't see you as they do. I see you for who you really are." Her heart skipped a beat. She had heard such words before, but never from someone like him. A human. Someone from a completely different world. Humans were not known for their deep connections to her kind, and yet here was Marcus, a stranger who seemed to understand her pain in a way no one else had. "I want to offer you something," he continued, stepping closer. "A way out. A chance to leave this place behind and come with me. You may not belong to your people anymore, but you don't have to be alone." Vela's breath caught in her throat. His words didn't make sense. How could he, a mere human, offer her something so monumental? She had been cast aside by her own. Her bloodline betrayed her, and now this stranger wanted to offer her a way out. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the raw emotion she had been holding back for so long. "You want me to leave with you? To go where? You don't even know me." Marcus smiled, a small but reassuring smile. "I don't need to know everything to see that you're more than what they've made you out to be. They've rejected you, but I don't want to do that. I want to help you. I want you to be free." Vela was stunned. She had never heard anything like this before. It was more than she had ever hoped for. The possibility of escaping, of starting over, seemed almost impossible, yet the sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache with longing. She glanced around the grand hall, the memories of her rejection still fresh. Was it possible? Could she really leave all this behind and trust a human, a creature from an entirely different world? But then she remembered something. No matter what she chose, she would always be an outcast here. The royal palace, her people, none of them had ever truly accepted her. The only place where she might find true acceptance was somewhere new, somewhere beyond the cold walls of her past. With a deep breath, Vela looked up at Marcus, meeting his eyes. "You are offering me a chance to escape my past," she said, her voice steady. "But why? What do you want from me?" Marcus hesitated for just a moment before answering. "I want nothing from you except your trust. I want to show you that not all humans are like the ones who turned their backs on you. I want you to see that you are more than your heritage, more than the title they gave you." The offer hung in the air, and for the first time in her life, Vela felt the weight of her decision. This wasn't just about escaping her people, it was about finding herself again. Finding a new purpose, a chance for redemption. She nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I will come with you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I need to know, what will I be in your world? Will I still be rejected there too?" Marcus reached out, gently taking her hand. "You'll be who you choose to be, Vela. I promise you that." And with that, the journey began, one that would change both their lives forever. Vela had never imagined a life outside the palace walls. Her world had always been confined to the grand halls of the royal court, where she had been raised to follow the strict customs and traditions of her people. Yet here she was, standing in front of a human who had promised her freedom, a new life, a future she never thought she would have. Marcus led her through the back gates of the palace, away from the eyes of those who had once looked at her with disdain. The guards, who had always been so protective of her, now seemed like distant shadows, unaware that the princess was slipping away from them. It felt surreal, almost as if she were walking in a dream. As they made their way through the darkened streets of the city, Vela couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, and a sense of freedom that she hadn't known she could have. The bustling sounds of the marketplace, the distant voices of the people, and the strange smells of food all felt alien to her, yet oddly comforting. For the first time, she was not confined by royal expectations. She was just a person, no longer a princess. Marcus spoke little on their journey. He seemed to be letting Vela process everything at her own pace, giving her the space to adjust. But every so often, he would glance at her with a reassuring smile, as though telling her without words that everything was going to be okay. Finally, they arrived at a small, quiet area at the edge of the city. The buildings here were smaller, more humble, and far removed from the grand structures of her past life. There was a sense of peace in this place, a calmness that made Vela feel strangely at ease. "This is where I live," Marcus said, gesturing to a modest building. It wasn't much, but it was home. "It's not much, but it's all I need." Vela nodded, taking in her new surroundings. It was nothing like the opulent palace she had once known, but there was something about it that made her feel welcome. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. As they entered the small home, Vela couldn't help but notice how different it was from the grandeur she was used to. The furniture was simple, functional, but there was a warmth in the way the room was arranged. It was clear that Marcus had put thought into making it feel like a home, even if it was modest. "I know this is all sudden," Marcus said, his voice breaking the silence. But I wanted you to know that this is just the beginning. I'm here for you, Vela. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Vela turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had always dreamed of a life free from the expectations of royalty, but she never thought it would come at the hands of a human, a species that had once been her people's enemies. Yet here she was, with a human who had offered her something more than anyone ever had: kindness, acceptance, and a chance to start anew. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not afraid anymore. For the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my own destiny." Marcus smiled warmly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "And you will be, Vela. I'll help you every step of the way." But deep down, both of them knew that this journey wasn't going to be easy. There were still many challenges ahead. Her people might come searching for her, desperate to reclaim the princess they had cast aside. And the world outside the palace was unknown and full of dangers, some of which she was not prepared for. Still, Vela couldn't bring herself to feel fear. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She was free, and she was no longer alone. As the days passed, Marcus and Vela began to forge a new life together, one that was filled with uncertainty but also hope. They faced the unknown together, and with each step, Vela found herself growing stronger, more confident in the life she was building with the human who had saved her. But little did they know, the real challenge was only just beginning. There were forces beyond their control, powers that still watched over them. And soon, they would learn that freedom came at a price. But for now, Vela couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of her true destiny? Or was it merely the calm before the storm? As the days passed, Vela's new life with Marcus began to settle into a routine. She spent her mornings exploring the human world, marveling at the simple pleasures that were so foreign to her as a princess. The sun felt warmer, the air fresher, and the freedom she felt every time she stepped outside was unlike anything she had known in her royal life. But no matter how much she tried to embrace her new life, the memories of her past continued to haunt her. The opulence of the palace, the whispers of betrayal, and the sting of rejection from her own people all lingered in her mind. Vela could never fully escape the weight of her title and the shame that came with it. And then there were the dreams that seemed to haunt her every night. In them, she was back in the palace, standing before the throne, the eyes of her people glaring at her with disdain. She could feel their judgment, hear their cruel words echoing in her mind. "You are nothing," they would say, "unworthy of being a ruler." It was these dreams that kept Vela awake at night, her mind racing, her heart heavy with the fear that she would never escape the legacy of her past. But in those moments, Marcus would be there, his presence a grounding force that reminded her she was no longer that frightened princess. She was Vela, a woman with a future, a woman who had the power to shape her own destiny. "I can't forget," she confessed to him one evening as they sat together by the fire. "No matter how hard I try, the memories keep coming back. The rejection, the fear, it's like a shadow that follows me." Marcus looked at her, his eyes soft with understanding. He reached out and took her hand in his, offering a quiet comfort that spoke volumes. "You don't have to forget, Vela. You just have to learn to live beyond it. The past is a part of you, but it doesn't define you. You've already chosen a new path. Now it's time to walk it." His words, simple yet profound, seemed to ease some of the weight pressing down on her chest. For the first time, she understood that she didn't need to erase her past to move forward. It could be a part of her story, but it didn't have to control her. Still, as much as she tried to embrace this new way of thinking, there was a nagging feeling deep within her. Vela knew that the peace she had found with Marcus was fragile. The world outside their small home was vast and filled with dangers she could not yet understand. Her people, the very ones who had rejected her, were not likely to let her go so easily. One afternoon, as they were out gathering supplies in the market, a group of men caught her eye. They wore dark cloaks, their faces hidden beneath hoods, but there was something about their presence that made her skin crawl. Vela quickly turned her gaze away, but the unease lingered in her chest. She had seen these men before, members of the royal guard who had once served her father. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice tense. "I think they found me." He glanced at the men, his expression hardening. "Stay close," he warned, his grip tightening around her hand. Vela felt a sense of urgency in his tone, but she didn't question it. Together, they quickly moved through the crowded market, trying to blend in with the throngs of people. Her heart raced in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder, but the cloaked figures were gone. Despite the brief moment of fear, the encounter only fueled Vela's determination. Her past might be chasing her, but she was no longer that frightened girl who had been left behind. With Marcus by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. "Whoever they are, they won't take me back," she vowed quietly. "I've chosen this life, and I'm not going back to the cage they put me in." Marcus gave her a small smile, squeezing her hand. "We'll face whatever comes together. You're not alone anymore, Vela." For a moment, Vela felt a flicker of hope, but deep down, she knew that their fight was only beginning. The shadow of her past would not easily fade, and her enemies were not going to give up so easily. They would come for her, of that she was certain, and when they did, she would be ready. As they walked away from the market, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street, Vela felt a strange sense of resolve settling over her. Her journey had only just begun. The future ahead of her was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would no longer be the pawn in someone else's game. She was the one in control now. And no matter what the world threw at her, she would face it head-on. The next chapter of her life was waiting, and Vela was ready to write her own story. Days passed, and the peaceful life Vela had started to build with Marcus began to feel more like a fragile dream than a reality. The calm they had fought so hard for was constantly threatened by the distant roar of a storm they couldn't yet see. Every time Vela ventured out, she noticed more strange eyes watching her. Whispers of her past life lingered in every corner of the village, making it harder for her to fully blend in. Though she tried to stay calm, her heart ached with the weight of what was coming. She had been an alien princess, an outsider in a foreign world, and that truth was something she couldn't outrun forever. The human world had taken her in, but how long would they accept her as one of their own? Would the king's men come for her, dragging her back to a life she never wanted? One evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the horizon, Marcus and Vela sat quietly outside their small home, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky. The evening air was cool, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But it was then that the silence was broken by a loud knock on their door. Vela's heart leaped in her chest. "Who could that be at this hour?" she whispered, panic rising. Marcus stood up quickly, his eyes narrowing. He had always been protective, but tonight, the tension in his expression was palpable. "Stay here," he said softly, moving toward the door. Vela didn't want to be left alone, but she trusted him. She stayed seated, her eyes never leaving his back as he reached for the door. When Marcus opened it, Vela could barely hear the low voices of the visitors, but the tension was immediate. Vela's pulse quickened as she could hear Marcus' voice rise in anger, though he kept his tone calm. She stood and slowly crept toward the door, her heart thundering in her chest. What was going on? Suddenly, Marcus's voice grew sharp. "You're asking for the impossible. She is not going back with you." Vela felt her stomach drop. The royal guard. Her past had finally caught up with her. Without thinking, she stepped forward and peered around Marcus's shoulder. 3 cloaked figures stood at the doorstep, their faces hidden, but the unmistakable insignia of her homeworld gleamed on their chest plates. Vela's blood ran cold. "Vela," one of them spoke, his voice cold and commanding. "The king has ordered your return. You belong to him. Come quietly, and we'll make it easy for you." Her breath caught in her throat. The moment she had feared for so long had arrived. Her body tensed, ready to fight, but Marcus stepped in front of her, blocking her view of the guards. "You'll have to go through me first," Marcus said firmly, his voice a clear warning. The air was thick with tension. The alien guards looked at each other before the leader stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Marcus. "We do not wish to fight. The princess is wanted by her people. It is her duty." "She is not your princess anymore," Marcus countered, his words carrying weight. "She's my responsibility now." For a heartbeat, the guards stood silent, seemingly weighing the situation. Vela's heart raced. She had never felt more out of place than now, caught between two worlds. The guards were her family's people, but they didn't see her as one of them anymore. They only saw a rebel, an outcast who had abandoned her duty. "Take her back, and this will end peacefully," the leader of the guards warned. "Resist, and there will be consequences." Vela could feel the heat rising in her chest. She had once lived for those people, obeyed their every command. But now she wasn't the woman they wanted her to be. She wasn't their princess. She was herself, and she had no intention of being anyone's pawn ever again. With a surge of resolve, she stepped forward, her voice shaking with barely contained fury. "I will not go back with you," she said, her tone steady, "and I will not let you take me." The guards' expressions darkened, but the leader only nodded. "Then you leave us no choice." At that moment, Vela knew the peaceful life she had tried to build with Marcus was over. The threat had arrived, and there was no escaping it. The tension between her past and her future had reached a boiling point. The guards turned to leave, but not without giving one final warning. "This isn't over, princess. The king will have you back, one way or another." As the door closed, Vela felt a weight pressing down on her chest. The danger was real now, and her world was no longer a safe haven. The road ahead would not be easy. But in that moment, Marcus's arms wrapped around her, and she found the strength to face the storm that was coming. "We'll fight," Marcus whispered. "No one is taking you back. Not while I'm here." Vela took a deep breath, her heart steady by his words. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. She had Marcus by her side, and together they would forge a future neither her people nor anyone else could control. Her journey was just beginning, and she was ready to fight for the life she had chosen. The next few days were filled with tension. Every moment Vela spent in the small village, she felt eyes watching her, whispers lingering in the air, and the weight of her decision pressing on her shoulders. The alien guard's warning echoed in her mind. "The king will have you back, one way or another." But for now, she was safe. Safe with Marcus, the human who had given her a life she thought she could never have. Yet, the outside world was catching up. Vela's peaceful life was a fragile bubble, and the more she stayed hidden, the more pressure built. Marcus continued to shield her from the village's gossip and the looming threat of her past. But Vela could feel it. The storm was coming. The early morning sky was overcast, and a chill had settled in the air. Vela couldn't help but feel that the world around her was holding its breath. It was the quiet before the storm. One morning, as she and Marcus walked through the woods, trying to enjoy a brief moment of calm, their peaceful silence was shattered by a loud crashing sound from behind them. Marcus instantly tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his side. He was always on alert, but this time it felt different. Something was wrong. Vela turned to see a group of men dressed in dark uniforms advancing toward them. The Royal Guard, and they weren't here for pleasantries. They moved swiftly, closing the gap between them and the couple. Vela's heart pounded as her body stiffened with fear. The guards were closing in. It was no longer just a warning. It was an attack. Marcus immediately stepped in front of her, his eyes scanning the approaching soldiers. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low but firm. Vela nodded, but fear gripped her heart. She wanted to fight. She couldn't just stand by while they took everything she had built. But Marcus's calmness was a reminder. He would protect her. She had to trust him. The lead guard, a tall, imposing figure, stepped forward with an icy expression. His voice was cold, cutting through the air. "Vela, you've defied the king's order. Come quietly, and we won't harm you or your companion." Vela stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. "I won't go back with you," she said, her voice unwavering despite the fear that curled in her stomach. The lead guard's eyes narrowed. "You don't have a choice." A sharp tension hung in the air as the soldiers shifted into position. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a show of force. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take her. Marcus stepped forward, his posture protective but defiant. "You'll have to go through me first." His hand moved to his weapon, his fingers brushing the hilt. But he didn't draw it. Not yet. The guard's lips curled into a sneer. "If you wish to die for this alien princess, so be it." The atmosphere crackled with danger. Vela's heart raced, but she held her ground. She wasn't going to let them take her without a fight. She couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything she had learned and felt in this new life. "I don't want violence," Vela said, her voice ringing with authority. "But I will not go back to a life of chains." Marcus's eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything slowed. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. He was ready. And so was she. Without warning, the fight erupted. The guards lunged forward, but Marcus was faster. With a quick swipe of his blade, he knocked the nearest guard off balance. Vela barely had time to process the move before she felt a surge of energy in her body, the power that had been dormant in her veins since her transformation. She had trained for this moment, though she had hoped it would never come. Vela moved with fluid grace, her alien strength surprising even herself. She ducked under the guard's attempted strike, her body twisting in a dance of agility she had not realized she possessed. With one swift motion, she incapacitated the guard closest to her, sending him sprawling to the ground. Marcus fought with unmatched skill, his movements precise and calculated. He wasn't just fighting to protect her, he was fighting for their future. But the battle was far from over. The remaining guards regrouped, their leader's face twisted with fury. "You think you can resist the king's will?" He spat. Vela's eyes narrowed as she stood beside Marcus. "I don't need to resist it," she replied coldly. "I'm not a princess anymore. I'm not your property." The lead guard hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes, but the other soldiers surged forward, and the battle raged on. Vela's heart pounded, but her resolve was clear. She wasn't going back. Not now, not ever. As the fight wore on, Vela realized this wasn't just a battle for her freedom. It was the start of something much bigger. A rebellion had begun, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even the king, stop her. The storm was finally here, and she was ready to face it. The battle intensified as the final guard lunged at Marcus, but Vela was quicker. She darted forward, using her newfound strength to disarm him, and sent him crashing into a nearby tree. The force of the collision left the guard unconscious, his body crumpled on the forest floor. With only the lead guard left, a tense silence fell over the clearing. The air was thick with adrenaline, and the ground was littered with the fallen soldiers, their once confident stance now shattered. The leader stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief, looking at the two humans who had just decimated his squad. "You," he stammered, his breath ragged. "You should never have resisted. The king will." "Enough." Vela's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering, her heart beating with fierce determination. "I'm done with the king's demands. I'm done with being treated as his possession." The lead guard took a step back, the grip on his weapon tightening, but he was no match for her now. She had seen the strength within herself. The power of her heritage was undeniable. And with Marcus by her side, she was more than just an alien princess. She was a force to be reckoned with. "I'm not your prisoner," she said, her voice low but full of authority. and neither is Marcus. The guard hesitated for a moment before glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting reinforcements. But no one came. The only sound was the wind through the trees and the distant echoes of the battle fading into the background. It was clear that this was a turning point, and the power was shifting. Marcus, standing beside her, spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "You came here thinking you could take her. Now you're leaving with nothing but defeat. Take a message back to the king. He's lost." Vela could see the defiance burning in the lead guard's eyes, but there was also something else. Fear. For the first time, the once unshakable power of the king seemed fragile. The guard took a deep breath, and with a final glance at the two rebels, he turned and retreated into the woods, his retreating footsteps signaling his defeat. Vela watched him disappear into the trees, the weight of the moment sinking in. They had won, but the fight was far from over. As the dust settled, Vela turned to Marcus, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, the relief flooding through her, but there was no time for celebration. "We're not safe yet," Marcus reminded her, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. "The king won't just let us walk away. We've made an enemy of a powerful force." Vela nodded, the gravity of his words settling in. This was only the beginning. They had challenged an empire, and now there would be no going back. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a symbol of defiance, of freedom. And she was ready to lead the fight for her people, no matter the cost. "Then we'll make sure he knows that we're not afraid," she said, her voice steady. "We'll make him regret ever thinking he could control me." As they walked away from the battlefield, the weight of their victory mingled with the certainty of the battles yet to come. The king would come after them, but Vela wasn't the helpless princess anymore. With Marcus by her side and the power of her heritage awakening within her, she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The war for her freedom had begun, and she would never back down.